Inside Florida Politics, powered by the USA Today Florida Network.
Donald Trump powers a red wave in Florida. Ballot measures on recreational marijuana and abortion rights fail. And Rick Scott returns to the U.S. Senate. Hello, I'm USA Today reporter Zac Anderson, and those are some of the stories I'll be discussing today with two great journalists, John Kennedy and Antonio Fins. Hello, gentlemen. Let's dive into these election results.
Let's do
Any idea that Florida is still a swing state, Antonio, really evaporated on Tuesday when Trump won by a whopping 13 percentage points. And this was really a seismic event in Florida politics.
It was, look, but it's also very expected. We knew going in that Democrats really were not competing for those 30 electoral votes. Neither Vice President Harris nor Governor Walz had come to the state. And quite frankly, even the Trump-Vance ticket did very little here. Trump had a rally in Doral right before the convention, then did a Latinos for Trump event, like a round table earlier in October. But other than that, there was no real campaigning for these 30 electoral votes. And largely because, look, Florida, the numerical, we talk about math, a million voter advantage for Republicans. And quite frankly, yeah, there's about 30% of the electorate that is NPA, no political affiliation. But a lot of those we've seen in past elections really do break for Republicans. And I think that, the most telling thing, and honestly, I think in some ways this election was even worse for Democrats in Florida than the 2022 race. It was a complete catastrophe, in large measure because it was, I had a couple of conversations throughout the campaign with Democratic National Committee Chairman Jamie Harrison. And the strategy here in Florida for Democrats really was not to compete for the 30 electoral votes. It was sort of to turn things around, to basically start building on a foundation that they saw, this grassroots foundation with these 40,000 volunteers, also with the two constitutional amendments, the fact that they were trying to compete in a lot of every state house race and in two congressional districts. And the end result is that the two amendments didn't pass. They got a majority of votes, but they didn't pass. They lost those two competitive or semi-competitive congressional races. And this foundation that they hoped to build across the state just did not materialize. And the question now is, where do you go from here? You've got a midterm election coming up, a gubernatorial race, where the Democrats really do not have a bench strength, who their candidate will be. So in many ways, the autopsy on 2024 looks even worse than the one back in 2022.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Antonio, this was not unexpected. I mean, the candidates weren't campaigning here. Kamala Harris did not invest in the state. The Republicans have all the advantages, more than 1 million registered voters over the Democrats. There's all kinds of signs here. Recent elections with DeSantis winning by 19 points in 2022, that Republicans were going to have a good day in Florida on Tuesday. But still, 13 points. I mean, Trump won his first race in Florida by a single percentage point in 2016. He won the second time in Florida by 3 percentage points in 2020. To go from 1-3 to 13, I mean, you're seeing basically astronomical increases here. It really, even the polling, obviously the polls were pretty far off in some of these states, but the polling here, 6-7 points, maybe. He basically doubled that.
Well, yeah, but there was some polling near the end of the campaign that showed that he was getting to double-digit territory. So, it could have been that maybe some of these independents or not NPA voters early on may have been considering the Democratic ticket, but then ultimately broke for Mr. Trump. But the fact of the matter is, remember back in 2020 when we saw a 3.4 percentage point win for Trump and we thought that was a landslide? Well, look, we got 13. But if you look at the gap since 2020, the number of new voters or registered Republicans in the state has also skyrocketed. And, so I think what's as really it's as I think if you go back 8 years to think that a Republican candidate would win Florida by 2024 by 13 points it would be mind boggling. But I think that when you see what happened down ballot, you realize that it's not just Mr. Trump. It is across the board in the state. People are voting the Republican brand.
And Florida, when you look at how Trump won across the country, he made gains with Hispanic voters. He actually carried Hispanic men. He made gains with working class voters. He made gains with younger voters. Florida as a state just seems like it demographically fits in with the political realignment that Trump is bringing about. John, what else can we say about Florida's red wave? It seems like it's going to reverberate for a long time in this state.
Well, it does. Yeah. I mean, the red wave in Florida appears, endless in this election. As you pointed out, we saw it nationwide. And of course, here in Florida, where Democrats had come into Election Day with a plan, for beginning their comeback in this state. But, what is it that the boxer Mike Tyson has said about that? Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And it was Republicans.
And Florida Democrats have gotten punched in the face a lot. This is always their plan. There's always just every election cycle. It seems like we're down. It seems like you can't get any lower, and they have to put a brave face on and say we have a plan. But the reality is, as Antonio said, they were talking about basically conceding the state from the beginning. Their plan was to pick off a few House races to try and to pass these amendments. It was a losing plan from the beginning.
Well, yeah, but for Democrats that would have been a sign of some progress, and that's what they were hoping for. I think a lot of it, kind of heading toward 2026, when there'll be another governor's race in Florida. I think they were trying to show some signs of life, and they had. We're looking to try to get out of this super minority hole that they are in the state house. That didn't happen. They had eyed more than a dozen races as possible pickups. Now that was aspirational, but in the end they wound up flipping one Republican seat and losing two of their own in the state house. So they actually are in an even deeper hole now than they were going into the election. There was a state Senate seat that they were also looking to win in North Florida that didn't happen. And, DeSantis got his way on the abortion rights and marijuana ballot measures. So, undoubtedly, he's going to be even more unchained than he has been before. And as we pointed out, Miami-Dade, which still has more registered Democrats than Republicans, it went for Trump and for U.S. Senator Rick Scott over a local Democrat in that race, Debbie Murkisal Powell, who is Hispanic. And, Trump and Republicans nationally gained support from Hispanic voters, at least more support. They have a strong plurality now from the Hispanic voter banks. And that's not a good sign for this state. It was a pretty devastating night for Florida Democrats. But we said that back in 2022 also. But as Antonio points out, this one might even hurt more. It's kind of a pattern that we've seen developing of one-party dominance in this state, and it's Republicans. So, for Democrats, I'd conclude with another Mike Tyson line. You may remember he lost famously to Lennox Lewis in a heavyweight fight. He said, "I guess I'm going to fade into Bolivian." Well, I think Democrats, welcome to Bolivian.
Yeah, and it seems like there really is no bottom. If you look at the 2022 midterm election, Democrats, they felt like they had some excuses to point to that why that election was an aberration. They just couldn't get the turnout in the midterm. Their voters didn't come out like they hoped. When you have a presidential race, turnout amps up, and even with stronger turnout, they really just got walloped. We knew, John, that Florida was trending right, pretty hard right, but there was also still a chance for Democrats to get some wins here and pass these constitutional amendments on recreational marijuana and abortion rights, which were polling, right around the threshold that they needed to pass. They fell short. This was a win for DeSantis, who campaigned really hard.
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly question his tactics. The use of state tax dollars and state resources in a campaign against initiatives that about 1 million Florida citizens had, gotten on the ballot through attaching their signatures to constitutional amendment, petition campaigns. The fact that he used state resources in this direction, unprecedented, never before seen in Florida. Will there be litigation stemming from this? There will be, but at this point, DeSantis has managed to exert more command over the courts. He certainly has the Florida legislature on his side, and I don't know where this effort to slap DeSantis for the tactics that he used will go. Like DeSantis has done a lot of stuff like Trump, normalizing stuff that we have never seen before in politics. And I think,
and he really hasn't paid a price for it. A lot of the things that, you look at his removal of these prosecutors, Andrew Warren and the prosecutor over in Orlando, who actually won her race. Warren lost, but there hasn't. There's been some court cases that have gone against him, but he's won some on appeal. It seems like he can really do what he wants at this point.
Yeah, because he's managed to like twist the judiciary to the point that there's nobody like reining him in, and just like as a nation we are headed toward an autocratic time and leadership. We may be seeing the same thing in Florida.
John, these constitutional amendments on marijuana and abortion rights, they failed because Florida has an extremely high threshold for passing constitutional amendments, which was changed a few years ago after lawmakers got upset with some of the stuff that was being put in the Constitution. It's no longer a simple majority vote, which is what it takes to pass most things in the democratic system. You got to get 60%. These amendments, they still got in the mid to high 50s. They still have a majority support. What does that say?
Yeah, it's another sign of how a huge swath of Floridians are not getting the kind of government that they want from this state. In this case, a majority wanted improved abortion access and recreational marijuana. But because the Republican-controlled legislature isn't addressing these demands of a lot of people, the legislature also looks poorly on these constitutional amendment proposals that bubble up from the masses. 18 years ago, Republicans convinced voters that they should require 60% approval to change the Constitution, no longer majority rule. So that's a high bar for any amendment, to pass. It can be done. Medical marijuana made it on its second try, and a higher minimum wage was approved by voters over objections from much of the state's business community. But, that 60% standard, which interestingly was approved by just under 58% of voters back in 2006, that has become a huge barrier. But beyond discussing the inequity of the higher level for approval, which neither Trump nor Rick Scott reached in winning Tuesday, those guys didn't get 60%. The more than majority support for these two issues, it may have some guidance for the Florida legislature. You would think that the Republican leaders would be hesitant to go any further in enacting abortion limits next year. And similarly, you might see at least some suggest within the legislature that, maybe they should enact something that would consider expanding access to recreational marijuana. Now, whether a legislative majority gets behind that idea, I think that's unlikely right now. But I think you might see some discussion of that in the legislature. But I'm afraid I think both of these issues will need ballot approval to really get any traction in the state.
And it'll be interesting to see if they come back, if they try to get them back on the ballot. They spent so much money to fall short. It seems like they're probably going to wait a while, but who knows? Well, another big winner Tuesday was Senator Rick Scott, who easily won his reelection contest. Antonio, Scott is already looking ahead and jockeying to take over for Mitch McConnell as Senate Majority Leader. That vote's going to happen next week. Does he have a shot?
Well, that depends on one, Donald J. Trump and his endorsement, whether via a tweet on X or on Truth Social or whatever. Look, yeah, he definitely has a shot. There are basically three other candidates in the race. One of them, John Thune, the senator from South Dakota, is really a right hand of McConnell. There's been a kind of change in the Senate demographics. So I'm not sure that Thune, in particular, with more of a MAGA representation in the Senate, not sure that Thune really has that much of an inside track on this. Then the other two candidates are John Cornyn of Texas and Tom Barrasso of Wyoming. They are more on the Trump side. But at the end of the day, look, it just depends on who Donald J. Trump as the 47th president chooses. And we know that Rick Scott is someone who is a longtime backer of Donald Trump. Back before even Trump was elected president, and it was either late 2015 or early 2016, before even the first primary contest. Rick Scott, as then governor of Florida, wrote an op-ed that appeared, I believe, in USA Today, and talked about why Trump, as a businessman, was the preferable candidate. It wasn't really the endorsements per se, but it was clearly basically a thumbs up. Both Scott and Trump have a very similar trajectory in business, men who were in business and then began political careers. So there's a lot of commonality there. And if you're Trump, the two things that you really value are, one is loyalty, and the other is, shared interests, shared past, that bond. And I think that going into this race, whatever you think of Rick Scott, I think he would have more of that with Trump than Barrasso and Cornyn.
Yeah, he definitely seems like the Trumpiest candidate for Senate Majority Leader. Seems like he's been the most loyal to Trump and has really hugged him closely. I was talking to somebody who understands some of the inside baseball on this, Antonio, and this individual told me that Scott is probably still a pretty big long shot. This is a secret ballot. You don't have to say who you voted for, and the Senate is a pretty insular club, and there's loyalties that have built up over the years. And even if Trump comes out and endorses Scott, it's not clear that would be enough. Now, I was talking to this individual before the election. This election was a pretty big mandate for Trump. Yeah. It's going to be hard to resist him after, winning this sweeping victory, but it's easier if it's a secret ballot and you don't have to explain your vote to people. It does seem like the Senate likes to have some autonomy here. What do you think?
I don't know. I like John was saying earlier, a lot of things that were norms are no longer norms. A lot of things that were not norms have now been normalized. And I think that I would wonder if Trump were to endorse candidate X and candidate Y were to win. I just don't know that in that Senate, maybe the Senate of 6 years ago, maybe the Senate of 10 years ago, but today, after this election, and given that the makeup of these new senators coming in, you would have to think twice about voting for somebody else.
It feels like it would be very hard to resist what he wants to do within the Republican Party.
And it could be, I don't know. I don't speak for the president-elect. It could be he doesn't issue an endorsement. He basically kicks it over to the Senate and says, okay, you guys decide. Who knows what he will do? I'm just saying that if Rick Scott has a path here, an endorsement from the president-elect would be critical.
Well, one thing that might help Scott is that Trump just appointed Susie Wiles, his campaign chief, to be his chief of staff in the White House. Susie Wiles really broke onto the statewide political scene in 2010 by steering Rick Scott to victory in the governor's race. And she went on to run both of Trump's campaigns in Florida in 2016 and 2020. She worked with DeSantis and helped him win in 2018. She's sort of considered among many now as sort of the GOAT of Republican politics in Florida. And now she's going to the national level. There's a lot of Floridians, Antonio, who could be considered for positions in the Trump administration. Florida has really become the hotbed of Trumpism and the MAGA movement. You got people like Matt Gaetz, Michael Waltz, Byron Donalds, all members of Congress who campaigned aggressively for Trump. You got people like Marco Rubio, who was on the short list to be Trump's running mate, and he's getting tossed around as a potential Secretary of State. Are we going to see like a Florida White House here?
Oh, well, I think you're going to see a Florida Trump administration. I mean, we saw that the first time around 4 years ago. Wilbur Ross, a Palm Beach resident, neighbor of Trump, he was Commerce Secretary. Ben Carson, who lived in Palm Beach Gardens at the time, he became Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. So I think there were also a couple others. Robin Bernstein got the ambassadorship to the Dominican Republic. So you're going to see a Florida look to this second Trump administration. I would venture, and we've been here. I mean, Zach, we were at the convention in Milwaukee in July, and there was talk about Marco Rubio as Secretary of State way back then. I think we're venturing, and no offense to HUD and Commerce, but I think we're going to see, I would not be surprised to see Floridians in some of those way more important posts that, like Secretary of State, or maybe CIA director, defense secretary. I know Michael
Waltz has been talked about for
that
defense secretary. It seems like Byron Donalds, has been one of Trump's most loyal supporters. John, do you have any thoughts on, Florida becoming, the farm team for the federal workforce here?
Yeah, it does have some of those overtones. In some cases, as you point out, a couple of the people mentioned, for example, like Byron Donalds, and another guy I'd mentioned too, State Senator Joe Gruters, from Republican from Sarasota, former state Republican chairman. The only thing maybe holding them back, I think, is that they may have higher aspirations in Florida. Gruters is going to run for chief financial officer. Donalds has been talked about as a possible, gubernatorial candidate. So, but Donald's wife, Erica Donalds, who's a former Collier County school board member and also an education entrepreneur. She works a lot in the school choice space, advising charter schools and virtual schools, that type of thing. She has been talked about even by Trump as a potential education secretary level person. Now, of course, part of Project 2025, which of course Trump distances himself from, but seems to echo a lot of the foundational elements of that plan, would basically abolish the Department of Education. So that may be a factor in whether Erica Donalds wants to go up to D.C.
Go in and shut it down.
That could be a goal as well.
Yeah.
So, and another guy that's been very active, he had previously been part of the administration as a Latin American
Carlos Trujillo.
He's likely to play a significant role in Trump's continued reach out to Hispanic voters and to Latin America.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a White House that is absolutely chock full of Floridians. And Wiles is really interesting. She got her start in politics. She worked for Jack Kemp and then on Ronald Reagan's campaign. And then she relocated to Jacksonville and was chief of staff for mayors in Jacksonville. John, you've covered Wiles, campaigns that Wiles has been involved in for years. She's an interesting choice for chief of staff for Trump. She would be the first female chief of staff. I did a profile of her earlier in this year, and I interviewed her, talked to her for quite a bit. I kind of focused on the fact that she really likes to work behind the scenes. She's not really out front. She admitted to me that she likes to kind of be in the background and let other people sort of take the spotlight. But she's proven to just be amazing, very, very adept at straddling all these different spheres in Trump world. And there's often a lot of infighting. She seems to have come out of that with her hands pretty clean.
Yeah, largely. I think it's something that while she's coming to the Trump White House now, right off the campaign where she was co-manager, and as we mentioned, she has been the manager of campaigns for DeSantis and for Scott in Florida. She also has that government experience, so she knows how to run sort of the nuts and bolts of running an administration. So that's a key position. And with Trump being a gatekeeper, keeping out a lot of people that want to tip him one way or the other, and play to his worst instincts, that could be a powerful role for her, and a very important one for the rest of this country right now, I think.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of Florida intrigue going on here with this new White House, and we'll be watching it closely. That wraps up our show for today. I want to thank our production guru, Rob Landers, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. We're out of here.